Bonjour, mes amis. Or should I say au revoir? Because today we are discussing something that would have been unthinkable just a few decades ago. The end of France's domination in Africa. How is France losing its grip on a continent where it once wielded unrivaled power? Let's unpack it. So ever wondered why France isn't exactly the life of the party when it comes to popularity in Africa? Well, let me drop the C word on you. Colonialism. Yep, way back in the 18th and 19th centuries, France decided to set up their powerhouse in the heart of Africa, especially in the West. Now, they weren't alone. Britain, Belgium, and Portugal were all in the colonial game too. But guess what? Today, France is still the big kahuna, wielding more influence than the others in its ex-colonies. France is the only one still operating military bases in its former African territories. They've been keen to flex their military muscles too. We're talking about more than 50 military interventions since the 1960s, folks, and that's straight from the horse's mouth. A report by the French Parliament, no less. So yeah, France is like that ex who just can't let go. They've got their fingers in a lot of pies, both militarily and politically, and that's part of why they're not winning any popularity contests in Africa these days. All right, so you remember how France was like the overprotective big brother during the Cold War? It was all, I'm just protecting you from communism. But let's be real, it was also super worried about the Soviets taking over its cool kids club in Africa. Even after the Cold War, a lot of African nations still see France as their go-to bouncer when trouble kicks off. Why? Because France is still super chummy with the high and mighty folks in Africa. Now get this, France's influence isn't just about tanks and troops. They've got their hands in the money jar too. Ever heard of the CFA Franc? It's the official currency for several former French colonies. It comes in two flavors, the West African CFA Franc and the Central African CFA Franc. These babies are tied to the euro, and half of the reserves have to be parked with the French treasury. Yeah, it's like a financial umbilical cord. And some people are saying, cut it already, because it kind of smells like neocolonialism to them. But hold up, don't jump to conclusions. Sure, colonialism is part of the game, but the whole France in Africa thing is like an onion, lots of layers, and it might make you cry if you dig too deep. It's way more nuanced than just the colonial hangover. France being Mr. Unpopular in Africa is actually a pretty new thing. Up until the early 2010s, France was kind of like the popular exchange student everybody wanted to hang out with. Flashback to 2013 when France rolled up with troops in Mali to help fight jihadists. The then French president, François Hollande, was basically treated like a rock star in Bamako, the capital. People were cheering, clapping, the whole shebang. Now enter Macron, the guy who's been the most globe-trotting French president since Chirac. Dude promised a whole new era for France-Africa relations. We're talking about giving back stolen artwork to countries like Benin and Senegal, pulling the plug on the controversial CFA Franc, and saying bye-bye to this sketchy thing called Franco-Afrique. That's basically the secret club of French and African elites pulling strings behind the scenes. Macron's big plans kind of fizzled out. Recent events have shown that France's cool factor in Africa is taking a nosedive. So why is that? Well, sit tight, because we've got three major reasons we think this is happening. So first on the list, let's talk about the French military's epic failure in the Sahel. You think sending thousands of troops as part of this big operation called Barkhane would do the trick, right? Nope. Even with the UN jumping in, jihadist attacks are still on the rise and political chaos is spreading like wildfire. That's one major setback for Team France. A bunch of military coups are happening, and these African generals are like, we need to protect ourselves from jihadists, that's why we're taking over. But check out the plot twist. Instead of relying on French forces, they're hiring outside help. Mali's new military government, for example, said au revoir to the French army and hello to this private military company called the Wagner Group. Yep, you heard that right. So the second biggie is the it's not you, it's me breakup vibe going on between France and Africa in the economic department. Remember when France was the top customer at Africa's trade fair? Well, not anymore. France's share in African trade went from a decent 7% to a can't even see you from here 2%, especially in their old stomping grounds. And who's stealing France's lunch? Let's start the roll call. India, Russia, Brazil, and Turkey are all swooping in like eager freshmen on the first day of college. But let's give a standing ovation to China, the real showstopper. Picture this. In the 90s, China had like a 1% slice of the African trade pie. Fast forward to today, and they're feasting on a 17% chunk. That's like going from the bench to MVP in record time. So Africa's not clinging to France for its economic well-being anymore. And a plot twist, France is now the one needing Africa for oil and uranium. All thanks to China, which is basically saying, hey, we'll give you cheap stuff in exchange for your natural goodies. You've got countries like Russia and China that are waging this PR battle to make the West, France included, look like a bunch of clumsy, two-faced neocolonialists. It's like they're the schoolyard bullies spreading rumors, and guess what? Some people are buying it. Enter the new wave of African politicians. They're not your granddad's politicians. These guys are more anti-colonial and down for shaking up the status quo. They're more open to new friendships and less enthralled by France's charm offensive, or whatever's left of it. In short, France is really having a tough time keeping its VIP status in the African clubhouse. And that's bad news for their influence game, don't you think? Hey, if those details help you to know what exactly is going on in Africa that causes falling French dominance, then do us a solid and smash that like button and subscribe. The West, and I'm talking about big players like the US and Europe, have really dropped the ball on the messaging front. Take Ukraine, for instance. Putin waltzes in there and it messes up food and energy supplies for Africa big time. Has the West made that clear to African nations? Nope. And because of that, a lot of those countries are sort of shrugging their shoulders, even nodding along to Russia's anti-NATO rants. The big title of the regime is colonial history. It's like France is forever stuck wearing the bad guy label. So when France steps in with troops or money, boom, they're hit with the neo-colonial tag. But get this, when Russia sends soldiers to Mali, suddenly they're the protectors. And don't even get me started on China. They pour cash into Niger and suddenly they're the business buddies of Africa. And now say hello to the multipolar world. Sounds like a sci-fi movie, right? But it's actually what Africa is looking more like every day. Forget the old days where France was the big shot power broker. We're moving toward a scene where multiple countries are jostling for influence. Think of it as a dinner party where everyone brings something to the table. From Russia's military muscle to China's economic powerhouse moves, and even India and Brazil doing their bit, the playground is getting crowded. Now about that security blanket France has been offering. It's getting kind of threadbare, people. African nations are already shopping around for other options, whether it's Russian private security firms or regional alliances. The days where France could swoop in like some Marvel superhero to save the day are looking a bit, well, dated. And let's talk culture and narratives. You know how stories shape worlds, right? Well, the storyline that's gaining traction is one of African self-reliance and agency. Less waiting for French Godot and more African Renaissance. This is huge because as the narrative shifts, the ties that bind France and Africa could loosen even further. Last up, economics. With France's slice of the African trade pie shrinking, we're going to see a whole lot more made in China and Russian investment here signs across the continent. And as the African economies diversify and grow, they'll be writing their own checks rather than waiting for French financial care packages. To sum it up, if France doesn't roll up its sleeves and adapt, we could be looking at the end credits of their African adventure. They need a serious game changer or else they'll be relegated to the where are they now columns. All right, folks, there you have it. We've taken a roller coaster ride through the ups, downs, and sideways turns of France's waning influence in Africa. From military misadventures to economic backslides and a pretty bad game in the PR department, France has a lot of ground to cover if it wants to win back its reputation on the continent. If you enjoyed this wild ride, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more Insight News.